I never thought I'd be the type of person to want revenge. Growing up, I was always the level-headed one, the peacemaker, the friend who'd talk you down from doing something stupid. But that was before I knew what true betrayal felt like. Before I learned that sometimes the universe doesn't balance its own scales. Sometimes you have to do it yourself. The day I discovered what Jake had done, something inside me changed. Something fundamental and irreversible. I remember staring at my computer screen, the evidence right there in black and white, and feeling this strange hollowness spread through my chest. It wasn't pain, not yet. It was the calm before the storm, the silence before the scream. People talk about seeing red when they're angry. I saw nothing at all. Just a blank white void where my future was supposed to be. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Jake Williams and I had been best friends since 7th grade when his family moved to our small town of Millfield. We bonded over our shared love of astronomy and our dreams of escaping our hometown for something bigger. Our friendship was the kind parents approved of. We pushed each other academically, stayed out of trouble, and had what everyone called healthy competition. At least that's what I thought it was. Senior year of high school was supposed to be our victory lap. We'd both worked our asses off. Perfect GPAs, leadership positions, volunteer work, the whole college application checklist. Yale was my dream school. It had been since I was 12, and my uncle, an alumnus, took me to visit the campus. I fell in love with the Gothic architecture, the history, the energy of the place. More importantly, I fell in love with what Yale represented. Escape from Millfield, access to opportunities I couldn't even imagine, and validation that I was more than just another small-town kid destined to live and die within the same 10-mile radius. Jake knew all of this. He'd listened to me talk about Yale for years. He had his sights set on MIT, equally ambitious but different enough that we weren't direct competitors. Or so I believed. "You're going to get in," Jake assured me the night before early decision results were due to be released. We were sitting on the roof outside my bedroom window, something we'd done hundreds of times over the years. The December air bit at our faces, but neither of us suggested going inside. "Your application is perfect." I remember smiling at him, feeling this wave of gratitude for his friendship. "So is yours. This time tomorrow we'll both be celebrating." He looked away then, focusing on something in the distance. "Yeah, probably." I should have noticed that hesitation, slight tension in his shoulders, but I was too wrapped up in my own anxiety to see it. The next day, I woke up to an email from Yale's admissions office. My hands trembled as I opened it. My breath caught in my throat. "Dear Michael," it read, "we regret to inform you." The rest of the words blurred together. "Rejected." I'd been rejected. It didn't make sense. My application was flawless. Perfect grades, stellar recommendations, compelling essays. I'd even interviewed with an alumnus who told me I was exactly the kind of student Yale was looking for. I called Jake immediately, tears streaming down my face. "They rejected me," I choked out when he answered. There was a pause on the other end. "Shit, Mike. I'm sorry. I don't understand," I said, wiping at my eyes. Everything was perfect. "Maybe it just wasn't meant to be," he offered, his voice oddly flat. "Did you apply to any safety schools?" I had, of course. I wasn't stupid. But that wasn't the point. "Yeah, but..." "It was Yale, Jake. It was everything." "I know, man. I know." We talked for a few more minutes before he had to go. He promised to come over later so we could commiserate together. I hung up feeling numb, trying to process that the future I'd been planning for years had vanished in the span of a 3-paragraph email. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Eric, another friend in our circle. "Dude, Jake got into Yale? Thought he was an MIT guy. Congrats to him, though." I stared at the text for a full minute before responding. "What are you talking about?" He just posted it on Instagram. "Early decision acceptance." I figured you'd know already. I opened Instagram with shaking hands. There it was, at the top of my feed. Jake, grinning broadly, holding up a Yale acceptance letter. The caption read, "Dreams do come true. Yale 2023 Bula Bula." The hollowness in my chest gave way to a searing pain. Jake had never mentioned applying to Yale, not once. And now he was in, and I was out. I called him immediately. He didn't pick up. I texted, "You got into Yale? When were you going to tell me?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Finally, I was going to tell you today. Didn't want to make you feel worse after your rejection. You never said you were applying there." Another long pause. It was a last-minute decision. Hadn't really considered it until the deadline. Lies. All lies. You don't apply to an Ivy League school on a whim. You don't write those essays overnight. You don't suddenly decide Yale is your dream school after years of talking about MIT. But I still didn't understand why. Why would he hide this from me? Why would he suddenly change his plans? It didn't make sense. Until it did. 2 days later, I was going through my sent emails looking for a confirmation from another college I'd applied to when I noticed something strange. In my sent folder, there were several emails to Yale's admissions office that I didn't remember sending. My stomach dropped as I clicked on the first one, dated about a week after I'd submitted my application. Dear Admissions Committee, I need to withdraw my application for personal reasons. Please disregard all materials submitted under my name. Sincerely, Michael Chen. I never wrote that. I never sent that. Heart racing, I opened the next one, dated a few days later. I apologize for the confusion. Please ignore my previous email about withdrawing. I was under significant stress when I sent it and have since reconsidered. I still very much wish to be considered for admission to Yale. Thank you for your understanding. And then a third, sent the day before decisions were released. To the Admissions Committee, I must confess that portions of my application were not entirely truthful. Specifically, my volunteer work at the Children's Hospital was exaggerated. I feel morally obligated to correct this information, even if it negatively impacts my chances of admission. Sincerely, Michael Chen. Each email had been sent from my account, but I hadn't written any of them. Someone had accessed my email and deliberately sabotaged my application, creating confusion, making me look unstable, and then suggesting I had lied on my application. And there was only one person who could have done it. Only one person who knew my passwords, who had access to my computer, who knew how important Yale was to me. Jake. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I actually doubled over, gasping for breath, as the pieces fell into place. Jake hadn't just applied to Yale behind my back. He'd actively worked to destroy my chances of getting in. My best friend, the person I trusted most in the world. I sat there for hours reading and rereading those emails as darkness settled over my room. The pain was indescribable. Not just the loss of my dream school, but the betrayal by someone I loved like a brother. It was as if the ground beneath my feet had suddenly disappeared, leaving me falling through empty space. When my phone rang around midnight, I wasn't surprised to see Jake's name on the screen. He must have realized I'd discovered what he'd done. I answered but said nothing. Mike? His voice was hesitant. You there? Why? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. He was quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. Then, I don't know what you're talking about. I saw the emails, Jake. The ones you sent to Yale from my account. Another silence, then a sigh. I can't explain. I'm listening. I didn't think you'd find out. Not a denial. Not even an apology. Just regret at being caught. It wasn't personal, Mike. I needed Yale more than you did. I laughed, a hollow sound that didn't even sound like me. Needed it more? What the hell does that even mean? You have options, Mike. You'll get into other great schools. Your parents can afford anywhere you want to go. But me? Yale was offering a full scholarship. Do you know what that means for my family? For my mom? She's been working 2 jobs since Dad left. This was my one shot to make things better. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy. Jake's family situation was tough, I knew that. But this wasn't about financial aid. You could have gotten a scholarship anywhere with your grades. This was about something else. He didn't respond immediately, and in that silence, I knew there was more. It was always so easy for you, he finally said, his voice bitter. Everything just falls into your lap. Perfect family, perfect house, perfect life. Do you know how hard it is to always be the friend in your shadow? Just once, I wanted something you couldn't have. Just once, I wanted to be the one who made it out of this town in a blaze of glory. The cold shock of betrayal was giving way to something hotter, sharper, anger. So you stole my dream. You deliberately sabotaged me. I did what I had to do. No remorse, no guilt, just a cold rationalization that made my blood boil. Does anyone else know? Did you tell anyone what you did? Of course not, he scoffed. And no one would believe you if you tried to tell them. It would just look like sour grapes because I got in and you didn't. He was right. I had no real proof. The emails came from my account. The timestamps would show they were sent from my home IP address, probably while I was sleeping or at school. It would be my word against his, and he was the golden boy who'd overcome his difficult background to win a spot at an Ivy League school. Who would believe me? I have to go, I said, my voice strangely calm. Mike, wait. I hung up. That night was the longest of my life. I lay in bed watching the shadows crawl across my ceiling, my mind racing. The anger gave way to a deep, hollow sadness. And then, as the first light of dawn crept through my window, to something else entirely. A cold, clear purpose. Jake was right about one thing. No one would believe me if I tried to expose him now. But that didn't mean he was going to get away with it. I got out of bed and opened my laptop. I had other college applications still pending. I would focus on those first. Get accepted somewhere else, somewhere good. Then I would figure out what to do about Jake. The next few months were a blur of forced normalcy. I avoided Jake at school, making excuses when our mutual friends questioned why we weren't hanging out. I threw myself into finishing my senior year strong, partly out of determination not to let Jake's betrayal derail my entire future, and partly as a smokescreen for what I was quietly planning in the background. I got accepted to several good schools, not Yale, but respectable options. I chose UCLA, telling everyone it had been my first choice all along. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I was learning how to smile through the pain. Jake maintained his distance, either out of guilt or fear that I might still try to expose him. When we did interact in group settings, there was a tension that our friends noticed but couldn't quite identify. He was cautious around me, like someone skirting the edges of a sleeping predator. If only he knew. Because while I was playing the role of the gracious loser on the surface, underneath I was meticulously planning my response. I wasn't going to expose him, at least not directly. That would be too simple, too quick. No, what Jake had done deserved something more elegant. I started by learning everything I could about Yale's admissions process. I researched their verification procedures, their policies on rescinding admissions, everything. I knew that if Jake had lied on his application, and given his willingness to sabotage mine, I suspected he had, there might be a way to use that against him. I also began collecting evidence of his betrayal. I recovered the deleted emails from my account, documented the login times, and cross-referenced them with my whereabouts on those days. I couldn't prove conclusively that Jake had sent the emails, but I could prove they were sent when I wasn't at my computer. Meanwhile, I maintained a detailed journal of every interaction with Jake, every inconsistency in his stories, every slip-up. I was building a case piece by piece for what would eventually become my countermove. But the most important part of my plan involved patience. Real revenge, I was learning, isn't a hot, impulsive act. It's cold, calculated. It requires time and precision. So I waited. I graduated high school with Jake and the rest of our class. I smiled for photos, attended the same parties, and gave no indication that I was anything other than excited about my future at UCLA. When summer came, I worked my usual job at the local bookstore, saving money for college expenses. Jake worked at his uncle's construction company. We saw each other occasionally around town, exchanging awkward nods or brief, meaningless small talk. To everyone else, we were just two friends who had grown apart as high school ended. A common enough story. But beneath that ordinary surface, I was waiting for the perfect opportunity. And in late July, it finally came. Our town's annual summer festival was in full swing, and I overheard Jake telling some friends he'd be working the beer garden on Saturday night. His uncle had pulled some strings to get him the gig, which paid well and was considered one of the better festival jobs. That night, I made sure to be seen by plenty of people at the main stage area, nowhere near the beer garden. I stayed until the headlining band finished their set around 11 p.m., then told my friends I was heading home. Instead, I circled around to the small office trailer behind the festival grounds. The trailer served as the command center for the event, where they kept the cash boxes, extra supplies, and, most importantly, the master keys for all the booths and stands. Security was minimal. The door was locked, but the window wasn't. Small-town trust at its finest. I slipped in quietly, found the key labeled beer garden, and let myself back out. 10 minutes tops. The beer garden closed at midnight. I waited in my car nearby until I saw Jake and the other workers locking up. Once they'd all dispersed, I used the key to let myself in. Working quickly in the dim security lighting, I located the cash box, which hadn't yet been collected by the festival organizers. It would be picked up in the morning. I didn't take all the money, that would be too obvious. Just enough to be noticed. About $600 from the day's take. Then I carefully replaced the cash box exactly as I'd found it and slipped back out, locking the door behind me. I returned the key to the office trailer and went home. The next day, the story was all over town. Money missing from the beer garden. Jake, being the newest worker and the one who closed up, was the prime suspect. He denied it vehemently, of course. There was no proof he'd taken anything. But in a small town, suspicion is often enough. His uncle had to cover the missing money to avoid trouble with the festival committee. People whispered. Jake's reputation took its first hit. It was a small thing, a warning shot. But as I watched the drama unfold from a safe distance, I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. This was just the beginning. The rest of the summer passed quickly. August arrived, and with it, preparations for college. My parents helped me shop for dorm essentials, threw me a small going-away party, and generally made a fuss. I played along, pushing thoughts of Jake and Yale to the back of my mind whenever they tried to surface. The day before I was set to leave for UCLA, I ran into Jake at the grocery store. He was buying snacks for the road. He was driving to Yale with his mom in 2 days. The contrast was painful. Both of us leaving for college, but him going to the school that should have been mine. Hey, he said, looking uncomfortable. Good luck at UCLA. Thanks, I replied, my voice carefully neutral. Good luck at Yale? He hesitated, then lowered his voice. Look, Mike, about everything that happened, I know you're still mad and you have every right to be, but I hope someday we can put this behind us. I studied his face, searching for any sign of genuine remorse. There was none, just the desire to clear his own conscience before moving on to his bright new future. Sure, Jake, I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Someday. He seemed relieved, obviously interpreting my response as a step toward forgiveness. He had no idea that I'd already set in motion the next phase of my plan. That night, after my parents had gone to bed, I logged into my email account and composed a new message to Yale's Office of Undergraduate Admissions. I didn't use my real name, of course. I created a new email address under the name Thomas Bennett, supposedly a guidance counselor at a high school in a neighboring town. Dear Admissions Committee, I wrote, I am writing with concerns about a student admitted to your incoming freshman class, Jake Williams from Millfield High School. It has come to my attention that there may be significant discrepancies in his application materials. While I am not at liberty to disclose how this information came to me, I feel ethically obligated to suggest that your office might want to verify certain aspects of his application, particularly his claimed leadership roles in community service hours. I apologize for the anonymous nature of this communication, but I believe the integrity of the admissions process must be protected. Respectfully, Thomas Bennett. I read it over 3 times before hitting send. It was vague enough not to be dismissed as a prank, but specific enough to trigger an investigation. And the best part was, Jake had indeed exaggerated his community service hours. I knew because I'd done most of those volunteer projects with him. Would one anonymous email be enough to get his admission rescinded? Probably not. But it would plant a seed of doubt, and I had more seeds to plant. The next morning I left for UCLA. My parents drove me to campus, helped me move into my dorm, and said tearful goodbyes. As I watched them drive away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Excitement about this new chapter, lingering anger about how I'd ended up here instead of Yale, and a quiet determination to see my plan through. College life quickly consumed me. Classes, new friends, campus activities. It was a whirlwind of experiences that left little time for dwelling on the past. But I never forgot. In quiet moments late at night or between classes, I would return to my plan, refining it, advancing it one small step at a time. 2 weeks into the semester, I created another email account, this time posing as a former Millfield High classmate now attending NYU. I sent another message to Yale's admissions office, raising concerns about Jake's character and mentioning the summer festival incident with the missing money. Again, I was careful to be specific enough to be credible, but vague enough to avoid being directly traceable to me. A week later, I used a third email account to send a message to Jake's academic advisor at Yale, whose name and contact information I'd found through some careful research. This time I posed as a concerned Millfield community member, mentioning rumors that Jake had cheated on several AP exams. None of these accusations alone would be enough to get him expelled, but together they created a pattern of concern that would be hard for the university to ignore. And the beauty of it was that Jake would never connect these anonymous tips back to me. He'd be looking over his shoulder, wondering who from our hometown was trying to sabotage him, never suspecting that I was playing a much longer game. Throughout that first semester, I maintained the facade of moving on with my life. I did well in my classes, made friends, joined clubs. I even started dating a girl named Alicia from my psychology class. On the surface, I was thriving at UCLA, seemingly having put the Yale disappointment behind me. But every few weeks, like clockwork, I would send another carefully crafted message to someone at Yale, sometimes to admissions, sometimes to Jake's residential college dean, sometimes to his academic advisor. Each message added another piece to the puzzle I was constructing, creating a picture of Jake as a student who had lied his way into Yale. When winter break arrived, I returned to Millfield with mixed feelings. Part of me dreaded running into Jake, but another part was curious to see if my efforts were having any effect. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The day after I got home, I ran into Eric at the local coffee shop. "Hey, did you hear about Jake?" he asked after we'd exchanged greetings. "No, what about him?" I kept my voice casual, though my heart rate picked up. "He's on academic probation at Yale. Apparently they launched some kind of investigation into his application or something. He's back in town but barely leaving his house." I feigned surprise. "Really? Wow, that's crazy. Do they think he lied on his application?" Eric shrugged. "Not sure. He's not talking about it much. His mom just told my mom that he's having some administrative issues with the school. But Zach said Jake told him they're questioning everything, even his AP scores." I nodded thoughtfully, fighting to keep the satisfaction from showing on my face. "That's rough. Hope it works out for him." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but Eric didn't seem to notice my insincerity. Later that day, I drove past Jake's house, a modest 2-bedroom on the east side of town. His car was in the driveway, but the house looked dark except for a single upstairs window, his bedroom. I imagined him in there, panicking as his Yale dream began to crumble, just as mine had nearly a year ago. The thought should have brought me joy, or at least satisfaction. Instead, I felt strangely hollow. This wasn't enough. Not yet. Jake losing Yale would be justice, yes, but it wouldn't give me back what I'd lost. It wouldn't undo the betrayal. I needed to do more. I needed him to know it was me. Not right away, that would ruin everything. But eventually, when there was nothing he could do about it, I wanted Jake to understand that his downfall had been engineered by the friend he'd betrayed. Winter break passed uneventfully. I avoided places where I might run into Jake, not trusting myself to maintain my neutral facade if we came face to face. Instead, I spent time with my family, caught up with other friends from high school, and prepared for my second semester at UCLA. The night before I was set to return to California, I composed another email to Yale's admissions office. This one was more direct, claiming to have concrete evidence that Jake had cheated on his SAT. I didn't actually have such evidence, of course, but by this point, Yale would already have Jake under intense scrutiny. The accusation alone might be enough to tip the scales. As I drove back to UCLA with my dad the next day, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was genuinely excited to get back to my classes, my friends, my new life. But another part remained fixated on Jake and Yale, unable to fully move forward until that chapter was closed once and for all. My second semester at UCLA was even better than the first. I declared my major in astrophysics, joined the astronomy club, and Alicia and I became more serious. My life was falling into place in ways I hadn't expected when I'd first received that Yale rejection. There were moments, sitting under the stars with Alicia, acing a difficult exam, laughing with friends in the dining hall, when I almost forgot about Jake and my ongoing revenge plot. Almost. Every few weeks, like a ritual, I would send another anonymous tip to someone at Yale. Not always about Jake's application anymore. Now I included concerns about his current behavior, suggesting he was struggling academically, which, given the pressure he was under, was likely true, or hinting that he might be involved in plagiarism. Spring break came, and I chose to stay in California rather than return to Millfield. Partly because I wanted to explore more of the West Coast, but mostly because I didn't want to risk running into Jake and giving myself away. The revenge I was orchestrating required patience and distance. If Jake saw me, if we talked, he might notice something in my eyes, my voice. That would make him suspicious. It was during spring break that I received the first direct confirmation that my plan was working. A text from Zach, another friend from Millfield. "Dude, Jake's not going back to Yale. Some kind of honor code violation. He's finishing the semester remotely, then transferring to state next year. Crazy shit." I stared at the message for a long time, letting the reality of it sink in. Jake had lost Yale, just as I had. But unlike me, he'd had a taste of it first, just enough to make losing it even more painful. I should have felt triumphant. This was what I'd been working toward for months. Instead, I felt empty. The hollow space in my chest where the anger and betrayal had lived for so long was still there, unfilled by Jake's downfall. When summer came, I took an internship at the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles rather than returning to Millfield. I told my parents I wanted to gain relevant experience for my major, which was true. But I also wasn't ready to face Jake, to see firsthand the results of what I'd done. It wasn't guilt, exactly. I still believed Jake deserved to lose Yale after what he'd done to me. It was more a growing awareness that revenge wasn't healing the wound of his betrayal the way I'd expected it to. I threw myself into my internship, spending my days giving astronomy tours to visitors and my nights assisting with research projects. The work was fascinating, and for whole stretches of time, I would forget about Jake, Yale, and everything that had happened. Then something would trigger a memory, a visitor from Connecticut, a mention of the Ivy League, even just seeing a particularly ambitious kid excited about science, and it would all come rushing back. In July, I received an email that changed everything. It was from Yale's admissions office, responding to an inquiry I'd sent months ago about my rejection. Dear Mr. Chen, it read, after a thorough review of our records, we have identified some irregularities in the processing of your application. While we cannot discuss the specifics due to privacy policies, we can confirm that there appears to have been some confusion regarding your intention to withdraw your application. In light of this discovery, we would like to offer you the opportunity to reapply for admission for the spring semester with the application fee waived. Your previous materials will be given full consideration in this process. Please contact us at your earliest convenience if you wish to pursue this opportunity. I read the email 3 times, my heart pounding. They had discovered the fraudulent withdrawal emails. They knew I'd been sabotaged, and they were offering me a second chance. My first instinct was elation. This was more than I'd hoped for, not just revenge against Jake, but a chance to claim what should have been mine all along. Yale, the dream. But as the initial shock wore off, I found myself hesitating. I liked UCLA. I'd made friends there, was doing well in my classes, had started building a life for myself. Did I really want to uproot everything to transfer to Yale, just because it had been my original plan? More importantly, did I want Yale to be forever linked in my mind with Jake's betrayal and my revenge? Could I walk those Gothic hallways without constantly remembering how I'd gotten there? I didn't respond to the email immediately. Instead, I called my parents that night and told them about the offer. They were thrilled, of course, and immediately started talking about the logistics of transferring. This is what you've always wanted, Michael, my mom said, her voice brimming with pride. Yale, just think of it. I know, I said. It's just, I've built something good at UCLA. I'm not sure I want to leave it behind. But it's Yale, my dad emphasized, as if that single word should override all other considerations. Maybe once it would have. Before Jake's betrayal, before UCLA, before I discovered that there were multiple paths to the future I wanted. I'll think about it, I promised, and I did. For the next week, I weighed my options. Yale was still an incredible opportunity, one that most students would kill for. The connections I'd make there, the doors that would open, it was hard to turn away from. But there was something else holding me back. Something I hadn't admitted even to myself until now. The revenge I'd orchestrated against Jake had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. I'd become calculating, patient, willing to play a long game to achieve my goals. These weren't entirely bad qualities. They could serve me well in my future career. But I'd also tasted the hollow victory of vengeance, and I wasn't sure I liked who I was becoming. Going to Yale now would mean carrying that version of myself forward. UCLA, in contrast, represented a chance to move on, to become someone new, someone defined by more than just a college rejection and the revenge that followed. After much reflection, I drafted a response to Yale's admissions office. Thank you for your offer to reconsider my application, I wrote. I am deeply appreciative of this opportunity and the recognition that there were irregularities in the processing of my original application. However, after careful consideration, I have decided to decline this offer. I am currently attending UCLA, where I have found an academic home that suits my interests and goals. While Yale was once my dream school, I believe that paths change for a reason, and I am committed to the one I am currently on. Thank you again for your consideration. Hitting send on that email was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Part of me screamed that I was making a mistake, throwing away what I'd worked for all through high school. But another part, a quieter but growing voice, felt relief. The summer passed quickly after that. I finished my internship at the observatory and prepared to return to UCLA for my sophomore year. I finally went home to Millfield for 2 weeks in August, my first time back since winter break. The town felt smaller than I remembered, more confining. I saw old friends, helped my parents with projects around the house, and tried to relax before the new semester began. I didn't seek out Jake, but I knew we would likely cross paths in a town this size. It happened at Miller's Market on a Tuesday afternoon. I was picking up groceries for my mom when I rounded the corner of the cereal aisle, and there he was. Jake. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "Mike," he said, his voice flat. "Jake." I nodded back, keeping my expression neutral despite the storm of emotions inside me. Satisfaction at seeing the visible effects of my revenge, lingering anger at his betrayal, and something unexpected. Pity. "How's UCLA?" he asked, making a weak attempt at normal conversation. "Good. Really good, actually. I'm majoring in astrophysics." I couldn't help the hint of pride that crept into my voice. How's things with you?" He looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "Fine. I'm starting at State next month. They have a decent engineering program." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. I could have walked away then, left him to stew in his fallen circumstances while I returned to my rising star. That had been the plan all along, after all. But something made me speak. "I heard about Yale. What happened?" Jake's jaw tightened. Someone had it out for me. Sent all these anonymous tips to the admissions office, claiming I'd cheated, lied on my application. They launched an investigation, put me on probation. Eventually, they found some discrepancies in my community service hours and rescinded my scholarship. Said I could stay if I could pay full tuition, which, he gave a bitter laugh. Not exactly an option for me. "That's rough," I said, meaning it despite everything. Watching him now, seeing the toll it had taken, I realized there was a difference between wanting justice and enjoying someone's suffering. "I'm sorry it didn't work out." He looked at me sharply, searching my face for sarcasm or hidden meaning. Finding none, his expression softened slightly. "Yeah, well, karma, I guess." The word hung in the air between us. Did he know? Had he figured out that I was behind his downfall? Or was he referring to his own actions, acknowledging that what happened to him was cosmic payback for what he'd done to me? I decided it didn't matter. "Sometimes things don't work out the way we plan," I said carefully. "But that doesn't mean they don't work out." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." We didn't say much after that. Made some small talk about other classmates. The unseasonably warm weather, nothing important. When we parted ways, there was no promise to keep in touch. No suggestion of rebuilding our friendship. Some bridges once burned stay that way. As I watched him walk away, shoulders hunched under the weight of his fallen dreams, I felt a strange sense of completion. Not happiness exactly. Not the vindictive triumph I'd imagined when I first set my plan in motion, but closure. Jake had betrayed me, stolen my dream, and I'd returned the favor. We were even now, and somehow in the process of executing my revenge, I discovered that my dream had changed. Yale had been the goal for so long that I'd never stopped to consider whether it was still what I wanted. UCLA had opened different doors, shown me different possibilities. That night, I sat on the roof outside my bedroom window, the same spot where Jake and I had sat the night before Yale decisions came out, when we were still best friends with our futures spread before us like a map of the stars. The summer sky was clear, the constellations bright above me. I thought about the email from Yale, the offer I'd turned down. I thought about Jake's face in the grocery store, the defeat in his eyes. I thought about who I'd been a year ago and who I was becoming now. The betrayal would always be part of my story. The anger, the careful plotting of revenge, those too were chapters I couldn't erase. But they didn't have to be the whole book. There were new pages to fill, new characters to introduce, new plots to unfold. I took out my phone and pulled up the Yale email one last time. Paths change for a reason, I'd written. As I stared up at the stars, charting constellations just as I had since childhood, I realized I was finally ready to follow mine. When I returned to UCLA 2 weeks later, I felt lighter somehow. The weight of betrayal and revenge that I'd carried for nearly a year had lifted. Not completely, but enough to let me breathe more easily, to look forward more clearly. Jake and Yale would always be part of my past, but they no longer controlled my future. That belonged to me alone. My sophomore year at UCLA began with a fresh sense of purpose. For the first time since Jake's betrayal, I wasn't defining my college experience in terms of what I'd lost. Instead, I was focused on what I'd found: a passion for astrophysics, close friends, and a growing sense that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The astronomy department had become my second home. I spent more nights than I could count at the campus observatory, tracking the movements of distant stars and cataloging their patterns. There was something profoundly comforting about the vastness of space, the way it made human concerns seem simultaneously significant and infinitesimal. "You're becoming a regular fixture here," Professor Hawkins commented one night as I adjusted the telescope's settings. He was the department head, a brilliant astronomer whose work on exoplanets had earned him international recognition. "Should we start charging you rent?" I laughed, not looking away from the eyepiece. "I'm just trying to get my money's worth out of these facilities." "Find anything interesting tonight?" "Just revisiting an old friend." I stepped back so he could look. "Antares, the heart of Scorpius." He peered through the telescope, then nodded appreciatively. "Beautiful. You know, the ancient Greeks believed Scorpius was placed in the heavens by Gaia to defeat Orion. Celestial revenge," I murmured. "Exactly." He straightened up and gave me a curious look. "There's something poetic about it, isn't there? The way these stories reflect our own conflicts, our own desire for justice." I didn't respond immediately, struck by how closely his words mirrored my recent experiences. "Do you think the revenge was worth it?" I finally asked. "In the myth, I mean. Orion died, but Scorpius was also banished to the opposite side of the sky. They never occupy the same night sky together." Professor Hawkins considered this. "That's the trouble with revenge, isn't it? It changes both parties, creates a permanent separation. Sometimes that's necessary, but it always comes at a cost." His words stayed with me long after I left the observatory that night. Had my revenge against Jake been worth it? I'd achieved what I set out to do. He'd lost Yale just as I had, but the aftermath felt more complicated than I'd anticipated. The satisfaction had been fleeting, and the person I'd become in the process was someone I wasn't entirely comfortable with. These thoughts were still circling in my mind the next morning when I met Alicia for coffee before class. She noticed my distraction immediately. "Earth to Michael," she said, waving her hand in front of my face. "You're a million miles away today." I blinked, focusing on her concerned expression. "Sorry, just thinking about something Professor Hawkins said last night." "About stars?" "About revenge, actually." Her eyebrows rose. "That's an unexpected topic for an astronomy professor." "It came up in relation to the constellations," I explained, not wanting to delve into the real reason the conversation had resonated so deeply. Despite how close Alicia and I had grown, I'd never told her the full story about Jake and Yale. It was a chapter of my life I tried to leave behind when I came to UCLA. "Well, now I'm intrigued," she said, leaning forward. "What celestial vengeance are we talking about?" I gave her a brief summary of the Orion and Scorpius myth, watching her face as she absorbed the story. Alicia was studying psychology, with a particular interest in human motivation and conflict resolution. I could almost see her mind analyzing the myth through that lens. "It's interesting," she said when I finished. "From a psychological perspective, revenge rarely delivers what people hope it will. Studies show that people who take revenge often feel worse afterward, not better." "Why is that?" "Several reasons. For one, revenge keeps the injury alive in your mind. Instead of moving on, you're dwelling on the hurt, feeding it, letting it grow. And there's often a disconnect between what we imagine revenge will feel like and the reality. We think it will bring closure, but usually it just creates new problems." I nodded slowly, thinking about my own experience. The months I'd spent crafting emails to Yale, carefully constructing Jake's downfall, during that time the betrayal had remained fresh, the wound open. It was only after I'd chosen to walk away, to decline Yale's offer and commit fully to UCLA, that I'd begun to heal. "What about justice, though?" I asked. "Don't some wrongs need to be addressed?" "Justice and revenge aren't the same thing," Alicia said thoughtfully. "Justice is about restoring balance, making things right. Revenge is about inflicting pain in return for pain suffered. The intention behind the action matters." Her words hit uncomfortably close to home. Had I been seeking justice when I set out to destroy Jake's Yale dream? Or had I simply wanted him to suffer as I had? The distinction suddenly seemed crucial. "What's bringing this up now?" Alicia asked, studying my face. "You seem really caught up in this idea." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell her everything. About Jake's betrayal, about the emails I'd sent, about the twisted satisfaction I'd felt when I learned he'd lost his place at Yale. But another part feared how she would see me after knowing what I was capable of. "Just academic interest," I said finally. "Too many late nights at the observatory, I guess. Makes me philosophical." She didn't look entirely convinced, but she didn't press the issue. That was one of the things I loved about Alicia. She knew when to give me space. As we gathered our things to head to class, she leaned over and kissed my cheek. Just remember, stars don't actually seek revenge. They just shine, regardless of who's looking at them or what those observers have done. Maybe there's a lesson in that. I smiled, grateful for her insight, even though she didn't know how applicable it was to my situation. Maybe there is. The conversation with Alicia marked a turning point. For months, I'd been trying to move on from the whole Jake situation, to pretend it was behind me. But the truth was, I hadn't fully processed what had happened. Both what he'd done to me and what I'd done in return. It was still affecting me, still shaping my decisions and relationships in ways I wasn't fully acknowledging. That afternoon, instead of going to the observatory after my last class, I went back to my dorm room. My roommate David was out at basketball practice, giving me a rare moment of privacy. I sat on my bed, opened my laptop, and pulled up the folder where I'd stored copies of all the emails I'd sent to Yale about Jake. Reading them now, months later, was like looking at the work of a stranger. The calculated precision of each message, the careful escalation of accusations, the strategic timing, it all spoke to a level of premeditation that was almost chilling. I'd been so consumed by the need for revenge that I'd transformed into someone I barely recognized. And yet there was no denying that Jake had deserved consequences for what he'd done. He'd deliberately sabotaged my application, stolen my dream, and then lied about it with zero remorse. If I hadn't taken action, he would have gotten away with it completely. Was that justice? I closed the laptop without reaching any clear conclusion. These questions didn't have simple answers, and maybe that was the point. The moral complexity of the situation reflected the complexity of human relationships and motivations. Nothing was black and white. Later that week, I received an unexpected email from my uncle, the Yale alumnus who had first taken me to visit the campus years ago. He was planning a trip to Los Angeles for a conference and wanted to meet for dinner while he was in town. We arranged to meet at a restaurant near campus the following Friday. When I arrived, Uncle Robert was already seated at a table by the window, looking much the same as always. Tall, distinguished, with the kind of confidence that comes from navigating prestigious academic and professional circles for decades. "Michael," he said warmly, standing to embrace me. "You look well. California agrees with you." "It does," I admitted as we sat down. "The weather alone is worth the cross-country move." "And your studies?" "Astrophysics, was it?" "Yes. It's challenging, but in the best way possible." "Excellent." He nodded approvingly. "Your parents mentioned you're at the top of your class." We chatted easily about my courses, his work, family news. Uncle Robert had always been easy to talk to, intellectually curious and genuinely interested in my perspective, despite our age difference. After we'd ordered and the waiter had brought our drinks, his expression grew more serious. "I hope you don't mind, but your mother mentioned something interesting to me recently. She said Yale had contacted you about irregularities with your application." I tensed slightly. "She told you about that?" "She was quite proud of your decision, actually. Said you chose to stay at UCLA rather than transfer, even though Yale had been your dream school." "It was the right choice for me," I said carefully. "I'd established myself at UCLA, and it has an excellent astronomy program." Uncle Robert studied me over the rim of his glass. "I must admit I was surprised. I remember how devastated you were when you were rejected." "Things change. Priorities shift." "Indeed they do," he agreed. "But I'm curious about these irregularities they mentioned. Did they explain what happened?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Not in detail, just that there had been some confusion about whether I intended to withdraw my application." "Ah," he nodded slowly. "That's unusual. Applications don't typically get lost in the shuffle that way. Yale's admissions process is quite rigorous." "Well, mistakes happen, I guess," I said, hoping to change the subject. "Michael," Uncle Robert leaned forward, his voice lowering. "I don't mean to pry, but as someone who serves on several alumni committees, I occasionally hear things. There was quite a scandal in the admissions office last year involving a student whose admission was rescinded. A young man from your hometown, if I'm not mistaken." My heart rate picked up. "Jake Williams?" "Yes, that's the name." There were multiple anonymous tips suggesting he had falsified parts of his application. Quite a thorough campaign, apparently. The admissions committee was impressed, in a disturbed sort of way, by how methodically the evidence was presented. I kept my expression neutral, though my palms were suddenly sweaty. I'd heard he lost his spot, but I didn't know the details. The curious thing is, Uncle Robert continued watching me closely. These anonymous tips began arriving shortly after your rejection, and the review of your application came about as part of the investigation into his case. Interesting coincidence, wouldn't you say? The restaurant suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. Uncle Robert clearly suspected my involvement, though his tone remained conversational, free of judgment. Very interesting, I managed to say. He was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how direct to be. Finally, he sighed. Look, Michael, I'm not going to ask if you had anything to do with what happened to that young man. That's between you and your conscience. But I will say this, the ability to play the long game, to be strategic and patient in pursuing a goal, that's a rare quality, especially in someone your age. I wasn't sure if he was complimenting me or warning me, maybe both. I'm not sure what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that you have talents that could take you far if channeled appropriately. He leaned back as the waiter arrived with our food. The question is, who do you want to be? The kind of person who uses those talents to tear others down or to build something meaningful? We ate in silence for a few minutes, his question hanging in the air between us. Finally, I spoke. I want to build something. That's why I stayed at UCLA. To focus on what matters to me, not on old grievances. Uncle Robert nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. Good. That's very good to hear. He took a sip of his wine. Now tell me more about this research project you mentioned. Something about cataloging star formations? The rest of the dinner passed pleasantly, with no further reference to Jake or Yale. But as we parted ways outside the restaurant, Uncle Robert gave me a knowing look that suggested our earlier conversation wasn't entirely closed. Remember, Michael, the most important trajectory to plot isn't that of stars or planets, but your own path. Choose it wisely. I nodded, understanding the double meaning in his words. I'm trying to. That's all any of us can do. He clasped my shoulder briefly. I'm proud of you, by the way. UCLA or Yale, you're going to make your mark. I'm certain of it. As I watched him walk away, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that he hadn't directly accused me of anything. Gratitude for his subtle guidance. And a lingering discomfort at the realization that my actions had created ripples beyond what I'd intended, reaching all the way to Yale's alumni network. That night, I couldn't sleep. Uncle Robert's question kept repeating in my mind, who do you want to be? It was the most fundamental question a person could ask themselves, and yet I'd been avoiding it. I'd been so focused on what had happened with Jake, on the injustice of it all, that I'd lost sight of who I was becoming in the process. Around 3 a.m., I got out of bed, careful not to wake David, and went to my desk. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing a letter to Jake. Not one I intended to send, just a way to organize my thoughts to articulate what I was feeling. Jake, I wrote, you betrayed me in a way I never thought possible. You knew what Yale meant to me, and you deliberately sabotaged my chance to go there. Then you lied about it, showed no remorse, and expected everything to go on as normal. I wanted you to feel what I felt, to know what it's like to have a dream within your grasp, only to have it snatched away. And now you do. You lost Yale just like I did. We should be even. But we're not, are we? Because what you did was impulsive, selfish, a moment of opportunity you couldn't resist. What I did was calculated, methodical, planned over months. Does that make it worse? Better? I don't know anymore. Here's what I do know. I'm done letting what happened between us define me. I'm done being the person who orchestrated your downfall. That's not who I want to be. I'm not writing to ask for your forgiveness or to offer mine. Maybe neither of us deserves that yet. I'm writing because I need to close this chapter for myself, to acknowledge what happened and move forward. We both lost Yale, but I found something else. A path that feels right, opportunities that excite me, a future I can build on my own terms. I hope you find that too, wherever you are now. Not because you deserve it, but because living with purpose is better than living with resentment. I'm choosing the former. I hope you do too. I read the letter over several times, feeling a weight lift with each reading. I would never send it. Some things were better left unsaid, but the act of writing it had helped me clarify my own thoughts, my own resolve to move beyond what had happened. I saved the document in a folder where I knew I wouldn't stumble across it accidentally, then went back to bed. For the first time in months, I slept deeply, without dreams of Yale or Jake or revenge. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. Uncle Robert's question, who do you want to be? Still resonated, but now it felt less like an accusation and more like an invitation. An opportunity to define myself on my own terms, not in relation to past hurts or grievances. I threw myself into my studies with fresh energy. Professor Hawkins noticed the change and invited me to assist with a research project he was conducting on the stellar evolution. It was a significant opportunity for an undergraduate, and I embraced it fully, spending even more time at the observatory, often working late into the night analyzing data and cataloging observations. Alicia was supportive, though she occasionally teased me about my relationship with the telescope. Should I be jealous? She asked one night when I'd canceled our dinner plans to observe a particularly promising stellar phenomenon. You spend more time with that thing than with me. The telescope doesn't talk back, I pointed out with a grin. Exactly my concern. She retorted, "You're becoming socially stunted." She was joking, but there was an undercurrent of truth to her words. I had been using work as a way to avoid thinking about Jake, about what I'd done, about the person I'd become during those months of plotting revenge. Throwing myself into astronomy was productive, certainly, but it was also a form of escape. "You're right," I admitted. "I've been preoccupied lately. Anything you want to talk about?" Hey. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were watchful, concerned. I hesitated. Since our conversation about revenge and justice, I'd been considering telling her the full story about Jake. Not to seek validation or absolution, but because authenticity was important to me, to us, and keeping such a significant part of my past hidden felt increasingly dishonest. "Actually, yes," I said, making the decision in that moment. "There's something I've wanted to tell you for a while. About something that happened before UCLA, something I'm not particularly proud of." Her expression softened. "That sounds serious." "It is. Can we go somewhere private to talk?" We ended up at a quiet corner of the campus botanical garden, sitting on a bench surrounded by flowering plants, the air sweet with their scent. It was early evening, the garden nearly empty except for a gardener working in the distance and a couple strolling along a far path. "So," Alicia said once we were settled, "what's this mysterious past you need to confess?" I took a deep breath and began at the beginning. My friendship with Jake, our academic rivalry, my dream of attending Yale, his betrayal, and finally my calculated revenge. I didn't hold anything back, describing the emails I'd sent, the patience with which I'd executed my plan, and the hollow victory I'd felt when Jake lost his place at Yale. Alicia listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful but unreadable. When I finally finished, the sky had darkened to deep blue, the first stars appearing overhead. "And that's quite a story," she said after a long moment of silence. "I know." I looked down at my hands. "I've been trying to move past it, to be better than what I did, but I wanted you to know, to understand who I was, who I sometimes still am." She reached out and took my hand. "Thank you for telling me. It's just, you're not disgusted?" "Horrified." "By what?" "The fact that you're human?" "Ikema." She shook her head. "Michael, what Jake did was awful. He betrayed your trust in the worst way, sabotaging something he knew meant everything to you. Your reaction, while extreme, is understandable, but still wrong," I said quietly. "Maybe, but acknowledging that, struggling with it, that says more about your character than the revenge itself." She squeezed my hand. "We all have moments we're not proud of, decisions we wish we could take back. The question is what we do afterward." Her words echoed Uncle Robert's in a way that felt significant. I've been asking myself that a lot lately. Who I want to be going forward. And she tilted her head, studying my face in the gathering darkness. "What's the answer?" "I'm still figuring that out," I admitted. "But I know I don't want to be defined by what happened with Jake. I don't want that to be the most significant thing I've ever done." "It won't be," she said with certainty. "Not by a long shot. You've got too much ahead of you. You just have to let yourself move toward it instead of staying tethered to the past." I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for her understanding, her wisdom. "How'd you get so smart about this stuff?" "Psych major, remember?" She smiled. "I've spent the last 2 years studying human behavior, motivation, the psychology of forgiveness and self-acceptance. Does that mean I'm just a case study to you?" I teased, relieved that the heaviness of my confession was lifting. "Absolutely," she deadpanned. "I'm writing my thesis on revenge strategies of astrophysics majors, a case study. It's going to revolutionize the field." I laughed, pulling her closer. "As long as you change my name in the publication." "The deal." She leaned her head against my shoulder. Seriously though, Michael, thank you for trusting me with this. It can't have been easy to talk about. It wasn't, I acknowledged. Wowie, but it feels right that you know. No more secrets. No more secrets. She agreed and sealed the promise with a kiss. That night marked another turning point. Having shared the full truth with Alicia and received not judgment but understanding in return, I felt a new kind of freedom. The past wasn't erased, but it no longer had the same power over me. I could look at what had happened with Jake more objectively, recognizing both his fault and my own, without feeling the need to justify or condemn either. The remainder of sophomore year passed in a blur of classes, research, and deepening relationships. Alicia and I grew closer, planning to move into an off-campus apartment together for junior year. My work with Professor Hawkins led to my name being included on a published paper, a rare achievement for an undergraduate. And my friendship circle expanded beyond the astronomy department to include a diverse group of students from various fields. There were still moments when thoughts of Jake and Yale would surface unexpectedly. When I received an email from a high school friend mentioning Millfield, or when I came across news about Yale's astronomy program. But these moments no longer triggered the intense emotions they once had. The sharp edges of betrayal and revenge had worn smooth, leaving behind a more nuanced understanding of what had transpired between us. Summer arrived, and with it, a decision to make. Professor Hawkins had invited me to stay at UCLA as a research assistant for the summer, a paid position that would significantly enhance my resume. My parents, while supportive, expressed hope that I'd come home for at least part of the break. "We miss you," my mom said during our weekly phone call. "The house is too quiet without you." "I miss you too," I said and meant it. Despite my complicated relationship with Millfield, the site of both cherished memories and painful betrayal, I did miss my parents, my childhood home, the familiar rhythms of the place where I'd grown up. "Can't you do your star research from here?" Dad chimed in from the background. "Sky's the same everywhere, isn't it?" I laughed. "Not exactly. UCLA has equipment I need access to." "Well, think about it," Mom urged. "Even a week or two would be wonderful." I promised to consider it, and after talking it over with Professor Hawkins, we worked out an arrangement where I could take 2 weeks off in July to visit home. He was surprisingly accommodating. "The stars will still be there when you get back," he assured me. "And family time is important. More important than most young scientists realize until it's too late." So in mid-July, I found myself on a plane heading east, watching California recede beneath me as we climbed through the clouds. The thought of returning to Millfield brought a mix of emotions: anticipation at seeing my parents, nostalgia for the familiar places of my childhood, and a faint apprehension at the possibility of running into Jake again. My parents met me at the airport, my mom engulfing me in a tight hug that smelled of the vanilla perfume she'd worn for as long as I could remember. My dad, more reserved but no less emotional, clapped me on the back with a gruff, "Good to have you home, son." The drive back to Millfield was filled with their questions about UCLA, my research, Alicia, and my plans for the future. I answered enthusiastically, realizing how much I'd missed these simple family interactions. As we neared the town limits, I felt a subtle shift in my awareness. For so long, Millfield had existed in my mind as the site of Jake's betrayal, the place I'd needed to escape. But looking at it now through the car window, the familiar storefronts, the park where I'd spent countless summer afternoons, the library where I'd first discovered my love of astronomy, I saw it differently. It was just a town, a place that had shaped me, certainly, but one that held no power over my present or future unless I allowed it to. The first few days at home passed pleasantly. I helped my dad with some projects around the house, went through old boxes in my room, met up with a few high school friends who were also back for the summer. No one mentioned Jake, and I didn't ask about him. It wasn't until the 4th day, when I went for a run along my old route through the neighborhood, that the past came rushing back. Without conscious intention, my feet carried me past Jake's house, the modest 2-bedroom where he'd lived with his mom since his parents' divorce. I slowed as I approached, not sure what I expected to see. The house looked different, freshly painted with a "for sale" sign planted in the front yard. A middle-aged couple was just leaving, accompanied by a real estate agent who was locking up behind them. I continued jogging past, but my mind was racing with questions. Had Jake's mom moved? Were they leaving Millfield? I couldn't deny the curiosity that took hold of me, the need to know what had happened to Jake after losing Yale. When I got home, I casually mentioned to my mom that I'd seen a "for sale" sign at the Williams house. "Are they moving?" Sorry, I asked, trying to sound merely curious. Mom looked up from the vegetables she was chopping. "Oh, they already moved, actually, about 2 months ago. Barbara, Jake's mom, got a job offer in Arizona. Phoenix, I think. A management position at a hotel there. Much better pay than what she was making here." "And Jake?" I tried to keep my voice neutral. "Did he go with her?" "I believe so, yes." She paused, giving me a careful look. "At least for the summer. I think he's transferring to Arizona State in the fall." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," I said, reaching for an apple from the fruit bowl. "We were friends for a long time." She nodded, returning to her chopping. "People move on. It's part of life." "Yeah," I agreed, thinking about how true that statement was. Not just geographically, but emotionally, psychologically. People did move on. I was living proof of that. The knowledge that Jake had left Millfield, that he was building a new life far away, just as I was, brought an unexpected sense of closure. We were both moving forward, away from what had happened between us, away from the small town that had been the backdrop for our friendship and its dissolution. That night, I sat on the roof outside my bedroom window, looking up at the summer constellations. Scorpius was visible, its distinctive shape easy to identify against the dark sky. I thought about the myth Professor Hawkins had mentioned, how Scorpius and Orion were forever separated in the sky, never to occupy the same heavens together. Jake and I were like that now. Moving in different orbits, our paths unlikely to cross again. There was a certain rightness to it, a natural conclusion to the story we'd shared. The remaining days of my visit passed quickly. I soaked up time with my parents, reconnected with old friends, and explored familiar haunts with new eyes. Millfield felt smaller than I remembered, more limited, but also more benign. It was no longer the site of painful memories, but simply the place where I'd grown up. A chapter in my life that had ended naturally, as all chapters do. When it was time to return to California, I felt a bittersweet pang at saying goodbye to my parents, but also an eagerness to get back to UCLA, to Alicia, to the research project awaiting me, to the future I was building. "Call us when you land," Mom said, hugging me tightly at the airport drop-off. "I will," I promised, "and I'll be back for Christmas before you know it." Dad gave me a firm handshake that turned into a brief, fierce hug. "Proud of you, son. Keep reaching for those stars." As the plane lifted off, I watched Millfield diminish beneath me until it was just one indistinguishable point in a vast landscape. So much of who I was had been shaped by that town. My childhood, my friendships, my ambitions, my first experience of betrayal and revenge. But I was no longer defined by any of those things. I was defining myself now, one choice at a time. Back at UCLA, I threw myself into the remainder of the summer research program with renewed focus. Professor Hawkins noticed the change in my demeanor immediately. "You seem lighter," he commented as we calibrated equipment in the observatory one evening. "The trip home must have done you good." "It did," I agreed. Gave me some perspective. "Turum, on stars?" he asked with a knowing smile. "On everything." He nodded, understanding more than I'd explicitly stated. That's the beauty of astronomy, you know. It teaches us that individual moments, no matter how significant they seem, are just points on a much longer trajectory. What matters is the overall path. And whether that path leads somewhere worth going, I added. "Precisely." He gestured toward the telescope. "Now, shall we continue plotting some celestial trajectories while we ponder these existential questions?" I laughed and bent to the eyepiece, focusing on the distant stars that had become my passion and, in many ways, my salvation. Junior year began with a flurry of activity. Alicia and I moved into our off-campus apartment, a small but cozy one-bedroom that quickly became home. My course load was challenging but exhilarating, delving deeper into astrophysics and adding some advanced mathematics courses that would strengthen my graduate school applications. And my work with Professor Hawkins continued, evolving into what would become my honors thesis. At the same time, my social world expanded. Alicia introduced me to her psychology friends, and I brought her into my circle of astronomy and physics classmates. We hosted small dinner parties at our apartment, joined an intramural volleyball team, attended campus events we wouldn't have considered before. Life was full, rich, balanced in a way it hadn't been when I was consumed by thoughts of Jake and revenge. It was during this busy, fulfilling period that I received an email that stopped me in my tracks. The sender was Jake Williams. The subject line simply read, "Long overdue." I stared at it for several minutes before opening it, my heart racing with unexpected anxiety. What could Jake possibly have to say to me after all this time? Why reach out now? Finally, I clicked open the message. "Michael," it began. "I've started and deleted this email about a dozen times over the past year. Not sure why today is the day I'm finally sending it, but here goes. I owe you an apology. A real one, not the half-assed version I gave you after you discovered what I'd done to your Yale application. What I did was unforgivable. I betrayed your friendship, your trust, and I did it knowing exactly how much Yale meant to you. There's no excuse for that, although I've spent a lot of time trying to come up with one to make myself feel better. The truth is, I was jealous of your family, your brains, your future, everything that seemed to come so easily to you. That jealousy turned into resentment and then into something ugly enough that I could justify hurting you. I'm not proud of that person. I'm trying not to be him anymore. You probably know I lost my spot at Yale. What you might not know is that it was the best thing that could have happened to me. Seriously, I was at Yale for all the wrong reasons. To prove something, to escape Millfield, to feel superior. I wasn't there because I loved it or because it was the right fit for my goals. I'm at Arizona State now studying engineering, and for the first time in my life, I'm doing something because I want to, not because of how it looks or what it proves. I'm actually happy, which makes me even more aware of how shitty what I did to you was. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response to this email. I just needed to acknowledge what I did and tell you how sorry I am. You deserve better from me. I hope you're well. I hear you're killing it at UCLA, which doesn't surprise me at all. Jake. I read the email 3 times, each reading revealing different layers, different emotions. There was the initial shock of hearing from Jake after so long. There was a visceral response to his admission of guilt, a validation of what I'd known all along. There was a complex reaction to his suggestion that losing Yale had ultimately benefited him, an ironic twist I hadn't anticipated when plotting my revenge. But mostly there was a profound sense of completion. Jake's apology, unexpected and unasked for, closed a circle that had remained partially open despite my best efforts to move on. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I forwarded the email to Alicia with a simple note. "Look what just arrived." Then I went for a long walk around campus, trying to process this unexpected development. By the time I returned to the apartment, Alicia was home from her afternoon classes, waiting with obvious curiosity. "Well," she said as soon as I walked in, "are you going to respond?" "I'm not sure," I admitted, dropping onto the couch beside her. "Part of me wants to. Another part wonders if it's better to just let it be." "What does your gut tell you?" I considered this. That his apology matters. That it deserves acknowledgement, even if I'm not ready to offer forgiveness. She nodded. "Then that's what you should say. Just like that? Thanks for the apology, but I'm not ready to forgive you." "If that's how you feel, yes." She took my hand. "Michael, you've spent the last year and a half working through what happened with Jake. You've examined it from every angle, come to terms with your own actions, and moved forward with your life. This email doesn't change any of that. It's just confirmation that he's done some of the same work on his end." I nodded slowly. "You're right. It doesn't change anything, but it does. I don't know. Complete something. So acknowledge that," she suggested. "Be honest about where you are. That's all anyone can ask." That night, after Alicia had gone to bed, I sat at my desk and composed a reply to Jake. It took several attempts, but eventually I settled on a message that felt true to my feelings without reopening old wounds. "Jake," I wrote, "thank you for your email. I won't pretend it wasn't surprising to hear from you after all this time, but I appreciate your apology and your honesty about what happened. What you did hurt me deeply. Not just the loss of Yale, but the betrayal by someone I considered a brother. It changed me in ways I'm still coming to understand. But like you, I've found that unexpected paths sometimes lead to unexpected happiness. UCLA has been good for me in ways Yale might not have been. I'm glad you found something that makes you genuinely happy at ASU. Engineering suits you. You always were good at building things, and occasionally taking them apart. As for forgiveness, I'm not there yet. Maybe someday, but not today. What I can offer is acknowledgement of your apology and a sincere hope that we both continue to grow past what happened. Take care, Michael." I read it over several times, tweaking a word here and there, before finally hitting send. As the email disappeared into the digital ether, I felt a weight lift. Not completely, but significantly. Another step forward, another piece of the past properly processed and put away. Jake responded the next day with a simple message. Thank you for responding. I understand about the forgiveness. For what it's worth, I don't think I'd forgive me either. Your well wishes mean more than you know. Same to you, Michael. Take care. And that was it. No further communication, no dramatic reconciliation, no continued correspondence. Just an exchange that acknowledged what had happened and the different directions our lives had taken afterward. It was enough. The remainder of junior year unfolded with a new sense of freedom. Having closed the door on the Jake chapter of my life, not with a bang, but with a quiet, mutual acknowledgement, I felt more present, more engaged with the life I was building at UCLA. My research with Professor Hawkins yielded exciting results that attracted attention from other astronomers in the field. I was invited to present our findings at a conference in San Francisco, my first experience speaking before a professional audience. Though nervous, I delivered a presentation that earned positive feedback and, more importantly, introduced me to key figures whose work had influenced my own. You've got a natural talent for this, Professor Hawkins told me afterward as we celebrated with drinks at the hotel bar. Not just the research itself, but communicating it effectively. That's a rare combination. I had a good mentor, I said, raising my glass in his direction. He smiled, acknowledging the compliment. Any thoughts about graduate school? It's not too early to be considering your options. Several, I admitted. Stanford has that new exoplanet research program. MIT's astrophysics department is doing amazing work. And of course, there's always Caltech, practically in our backyard. All excellent choices, he nodded. Though I should mention that Yale's program is also quite impressive, particularly in stellar evolution. I nearly choked on my drink. Yale? Yes, he continued, seemingly unaware of my reaction. Their new observatory facility is state-of-the-art, and they're actively recruiting promising young researchers. He gave me a sidelong glance. Something to consider, perhaps. I recovered my composure quickly. I'll keep it in mind. The conversation moved on to other topics, but the mention of Yale lingered in my thoughts. It was strange to hear the name without feeling that immediate stab of loss and betrayal. Stranger still to consider it as a genuine possibility for my future. Yet there it was, Yale once again on my horizon, but in a completely different context than before. Back at UCLA, I mentioned the exchange to Alicia as we prepared dinner in our small kitchen. What do you think? I asked, chopping vegetables while she stirred sauce on the stove. Is it crazy to even consider Yale after everything? She thought for a moment. Not crazy. Maybe. Poetic. Full circle? I don't know. The question is whether you'd be going for the right reasons. What would those be? Academic fit, research opportunities, faculty you want to work with. She turned to face me. Not to prove something to yourself or to Jake or to the universe? I nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in her caution. It would be strange walking those halls after wanting it for so long, then losing it, then thinking I'd moved on completely. But it wouldn't be the same Yale, she pointed out. Undergraduate Yale and graduate Yale are different worlds. Different departments, different purposes. You wouldn't be going as the 18-year-old who dreamed of escaping Millfield. You'd be going as the accomplished researcher you've become. True, I conceded. Still, I'm not sure I'm ready to seriously consider it. There are plenty of other great programs. Absolutely, she agreed. Just don't rule it out because of the past. That would be giving the past too much power over your future. Her words stayed with me in the following weeks as I began researching graduate programs in earnest. I created a spreadsheet of potential schools, noting their strengths, faculty working in my areas of interest, and funding opportunities. Yale was on the list, but so were a dozen other top programs across the country. As senior year approached, my focus narrowed to my honors thesis and graduate school applications. Alicia and I had serious conversations about our future together. Her plans for a PhD in clinical psychology, my astrophysics ambitions, how we might navigate potentially attending different graduate schools. We'll figure it out, she assured me one night as we lay in bed, discussing the possibility of a long-distance relationship. If we're both on the East Coast, even at different schools, we can see each other on weekends. If I stay west and you go east, or vice versa, we'll have breaks, summers. It's not ideal, I said, tracing patterns on her arm. I've gotten used to coming home to you every day. Me too, she nestled closer. But it's temporary. A few years, that's all. And then we can make decisions together about where to build our permanent life. Her confidence was reassuring. We were planning a future together, one that accommodated both our ambitions. It was so different from the single-minded focus I'd once had on Yale. A more mature vision that recognized the complexity of life and relationships. Senior year began with a whirlwind of activity, finalizing my thesis research, writing graduate school essays, requesting letters of recommendation, preparing for the GRE. Between academic commitments and application deadlines, there was hardly time to think about the past or worry about the future. I was fully immersed in the present, in the work before me. It was during this busy period that I received another unexpected communication. Not from Jake this time, but from Yale itself. An email from the director of graduate studies in their astronomy department, expressing interest in my research and encouraging me to apply to their program. Professor Hawkins mentioned your work when we spoke at the Astrophysics Consortium last month, the email explained. We're particularly interested in your approach to analyzing stellar formation patterns. Your perspective would be a valuable addition to our department. I sat back staring at the screen in disbelief. Yale was recruiting me. After everything, the rejection, the betrayal, the revenge, the declined second chance at undergraduate admission, Yale was actively seeking me out for their graduate program. The irony wasn't lost on me. I laughed out loud, shaking my head at the strange circular path my life had taken. Then I forwarded the email to Alicia with the simple comment, "The universe has a sense of humor." She responded within minutes, or a sense of justice. Maybe this is how things were always supposed to work out? I considered her perspective. Was this cosmic justice? The universe realigning after the disruption caused by Jake's betrayal and my revenge? Or was it simply the natural result of my hard work and Professor Hawkins' professional network? Perhaps it didn't matter. What mattered was how I responded, not just to this email, but to the opportunity it represented. Would I apply to Yale because it was objectively the right program for my interests? Or would I avoid it because of its complicated history in my life? Or worse, would I pursue it specifically because of that history? Because of some lingering need to claim what had once been denied me? I needed clarity before making a decision. The next day, I sought out Professor Hawkins during his office hours. He welcomed me with his usual warm smile, clearing a stack of papers from the chair opposite his desk. "Michael, come in." "How's the thesis coming along?" "Well, I've been analyzing the most recent data set, and there are some interesting patterns emerging." "Excellent. I'm looking forward to seeing the results." He leaned back in his chair. "But I suspect that's not why you're here." I smiled slightly. He knew me too well by now. "No, it's not. I received an email from Yale's astronomy department. They mentioned you spoke about my research at the consortium." "Ah, yes." He nodded. "Dr. Levinson was quite interested in your methodology. He's doing similar work there, though from a different angle." "I appreciate the recommendation," I said carefully. "But I wanted to ask, did you know about my history with Yale? The undergraduate application situation?" Professor Hawkins' expression remained neutral. "I was aware there had been some irregularity with your application. The details weren't clear to me." I nodded slowly. "It's complicated, and it factors into my decision about whether to apply to their graduate program." "May I offer an observation?" he asked. "Of course. In my experience, the students sometimes ascribe too much meaning to which institution they attend. They see it as defining their identity, their worth, their future." He folded his hands on his desk. "The truth is, Michael, your work would be exceptional whether you did it at Yale, UCLA, or a community college. The value is in the research itself, in the questions you're asking, and the methods you're developing to answer them." "So you're saying it doesn't matter where I go for graduate school?" "Not exactly. Different programs offer different resources, different colleagues, different opportunities. Those factors matter. But the symbolic weight people attach to certain institutions, that's largely artificial." He paused. "What matters is whether Yale is the right place for the specific research you want to pursue. Everything else is background noise." His perspective was clarifying. I'd been thinking of Yale as this loaded symbol of what I'd lost, what had been taken from me, what I might reclaim. But that wasn't the right framework for making this decision. I needed to approach it as a researcher, evaluating the program on its merits relative to my goals. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "That helps." "I'm glad," he smiled. "For what it's worth, I think you'd thrive in Yale's program. Dr. Levinson's work on stellar evolution aligns perfectly with your interests. But there are other excellent options too. Stanford's new exoplanet initiative is groundbreaking, and Berkeley has that grant for the high-resolution spectroscopy project. We discuss these programs and others for the next hour, focusing on the substantive differences between them: research emphasis, faculty specialties, available equipment, funding structures. By the time I left his office, I had a clearer picture of the landscape and a more grounded approach to my decision. That evening, I added Yale to my application list. Not at the top, not with any special significance, just as one of several strong programs I would apply to based on academic fit rather than emotional history. The application season passed in a blur of essays, forms, and recommendations. I applied to 8 programs in total, each selected for specific strengths related to my research interests. When the last application was submitted in mid-December, I felt a profound sense of relief, followed quickly by the anxiety of waiting for responses. Alicia was going through the same process with psychology programs, though on a slightly different timeline. We supported each other through the stress, celebrating small victories and comforting each other through moments of doubt. Winter break arrived, bringing with it a return to Millfield for the holidays. This visit felt different from the summer one, more relaxed, more focused on family time, rather than confronting the past. Millfield was just Millfield now, the place my parents lived, the setting for holiday traditions, neither idolized nor demonized in my mind. Christmas morning brought the usual exchange of gifts, followed by my mom's traditional cinnamon rolls and a lazy day in pajamas watching old movies. It was simple, comfortable, a reminder of the solid foundation my family had always provided. That evening after dinner, my dad pulled me aside into his study. "I have something for you," he said, opening a drawer in his desk. I was waiting for the right moment. He handed me a small box wrapped in silver paper. This isn't a Christmas gift exactly, more of a milestone recognition. Curious, I unwrapped it to find a vintage pocket watch, its gold case gleaming in the soft light of the study. It was my father's, Dad explained, and his father's before that. Family tradition says it gets passed down when a son reaches a crossroads in his life, a point of significant decision. I turned the watch over in my hands, feeling its weight, its history. "It's beautiful," I said softly. "But why now?" "I already submitted my applications." "Because the decisions haven't come in yet. Because you're standing at a threshold between your past and your future. And because," he hesitated, uncharacteristically emotional, "because I'm proud of the man you've become, Michael. Not just your academic achievements, though those are impressive. I'm proud of how you've handled challenges, how you've grown from them." I looked up, surprised by the depth of feeling in his voice. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot. Your mother and I have watched you navigate some difficult waters these past few years. We didn't always understand exactly what was happening. You kept a lot to yourself. But we could see you wrestling with something significant, something that changed you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I'd never told my parents the full story about Jake and Yale. They knew the basic outline, that I'd been rejected, that Jake and I had fallen out, that I'd ultimately embraced UCLA instead. But they didn't know about the betrayal or the revenge. I'd spared them those details, partly to protect them, partly because I wasn't proud of who I'd been during that time. Whatever it was, Dad continued, "You came through it stronger, more thoughtful, more certain of who you are and what matters to you." He gestured to the watch. "That's what this represents. Not just the decisions ahead, but the wisdom you'll bring to them because of what you've already faced." I closed my hand around the watch, deeply moved by the gift and what it symbolized. "I'll treasure it," I promised. As we rejoined the family in the living room, the weight of the watch in my pocket felt right, a tangible connection to my heritage, a reminder that personal growth often comes through challenge, and a symbol of the continuity between past and future. The rest of winter break passed peacefully. I caught up with a few old friends, spent quality time with my parents, and even managed to make progress on my thesis between holiday gatherings. Thoughts of graduate school, and Yale in particular, receded to the background, something to be addressed when decisions arrived in the spring. Returning to UCLA for my final undergraduate semester brought a mix of emotions: excitement about completing my thesis, anticipation of graduation, anxiety about graduate school decisions, and a bittersweet awareness that this chapter of my life, these transformative years at UCLA, was coming to a close. Alicia and I settled back into our routine, both of us focusing on finishing strong academically while beginning to discuss more concrete plans for the future. Her top choice programs were on the East Coast: Harvard, Yale, Columbia. If I landed at Yale or Princeton, we could feasibly live together. If not, we were prepared for a few years of long-distance relationship while completing our respective degrees. We'll figure it out became our mantra, a reminder that our commitment to each other transcended geographical constraints. February arrived, bringing with it the first graduate school responses. I was accepted to Berkeley with a full fellowship, a tremendous offer that instantly relieved some of the pressure. Other responses followed: waitlisted at Princeton, accepted at University of Arizona, rejected from Stanford, a disappointment, but not devastating. Yale's decision came on a rainy Tuesday morning in early March. I was in the campus coffee shop studying for a quantum mechanics exam when the email notification appeared on my phone. My heart rate instantly accelerated as I opened the message. "Dear Michael," it began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to the Astronomy and Astrophysics PhD program at Yale University with a full fellowship." The rest of the email detailed the financial package, mentorship arrangements, and next steps, but I had to read it several times before fully absorbing the information. Yale. I'd been accepted to Yale, not as an undergraduate seeking escape from Millfield, but as a graduate researcher specifically recruited for my work in astrophysics. My first instinct was to call Alicia, but she was in the middle of a clinical practicum and wouldn't be available for hours. Instead, I packed up my study materials and walked across campus to the observatory, seeking out Professor Hawkins. I found him in his office, reviewing a student's paper, his reading glasses perched precariously on the end of his nose. He looked up when I knocked on the open door. "Michael, come in. You look like you have news." "I do." I handed him my phone with the Yale email displayed. It just came through. He read it quickly, a smile spreading across his face. "Excellent. A full fellowship, no less. They clearly recognize your potential." "It's a strange feeling," I admitted, taking a seat across from him. "Yale has been such a complicated symbol in my life for so long. And now it's simply one of several excellent programs interested in your research." He finished for me. "A concrete opportunity rather than an abstract ideal." "Exactly." I leaned back in the chair. "I've been accepted to Berkeley too, with a fellowship, and Arizona. All strong options." He removed his glasses, folding them carefully. "What factors will guide your decision?" I'd been thinking about this extensively. Research alignment is primary. Faculty I want to work with. Equipment access. Location matters too, considering Alicia's options for psychology programs. All practical considerations. He nodded approvingly. "No emotional baggage about Yale anymore?" I smiled slightly, appreciating his directness. "Less than there used to be. It's still there. How could it not be? But it's not driving the decision." "That's wisdom," he said simply, "making peace with the past without letting it dictate your future." I've had good teachers. I acknowledged my gratitude extending beyond academic mentorship to the life lessons he'd imparted over the years. He waved this away modestly. "You've done the hard work yourself. I've merely offered occasional perspective." We discussed the relative merits of the programs that had accepted me, analyzing each one's strengths and potential limitations. Professor Hawkins was careful not to push me toward any particular choice, offering information and questions rather than direct advice. As our conversation wound down, he asked, "When do you need to decide?" "April 15th is the standard response deadline." "Well then," he stood, extending his hand, "you have some thinking to do. But whatever you choose, Michael, you've earned this opportunity. Remember that." I shook his hand, feeling a surge of gratitude for his guidance over the years. "I will. Thank you." For everything. Later that day, when Alicia returned from her practicum, we celebrated my Yale acceptance with takeout and wine in our apartment. The timing was perfect. She had received her own acceptance to Yale's clinical psychology program just 2 days earlier. "It's like the universe is arranging things for us," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "You, me, Yale. It almost seems too perfect." "Almost," I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. "But we still have decisions to make." Berkeley made a compelling offer too. True. She took a sip of wine, considering. "But their psych program waitlisted me. If we're prioritizing being together?" "We are," I confirmed. "But we also need to consider the best academic fit for each of us. These are 5-year commitments minimum." We spent the evening weighing options, discussing possibilities, imagining futures at different institutions. It was a complex decision with multiple factors to consider, but the conversation was hopeful, forward-looking, focused on building something together rather than reacting to past events. Over the next few weeks, I visited both Yale and Berkeley, touring their facilities, meeting with potential advisors, getting a feel for the environments where I might spend the next phase of my academic career. Both programs were impressive in different ways. Berkeley had cutting-edge equipment and a more collaborative culture. Yale offered the opportunity to work directly with Dr. Levinson, whose research on stellar evolution closely paralleled my own interests. The Yale visit was particularly surreal. Walking those Gothic halls that I'd dreamed of for so long, I felt an odd sense of déjà vu, as if I'd been there before, even though I hadn't. The campus was both exactly as I'd imagined and completely different. In my teenage fantasies, Yale had represented escape, validation, a ticket to a larger world. Now it was simply one potential setting for the next phase of my research. Impressive, certainly, but no longer imbued with mythic significance. During my campus tour, I found myself at the admissions office, the same office that had rejected my undergraduate application years ago, the same office that had later discovered the sabotage, the same office I'd bombarded with anonymous tips about Jake. It was just a building now, institutional and impersonal, no longer a site of intense emotional investment. As I stood there staring at the entrance, a memory surfaced. The letter I'd written to Jake but never sent. The one where I'd expressed my determination to move beyond what had happened between us. Living with purpose is better than living with resentment. I'd written, I'm choosing the former. Standing before Yale's admissions office, I realized how far I'd come in honoring that commitment. I was considering Yale now solely on its merits as a graduate program, not as a symbol of what had been stolen from me or as a battlefield for old grievances. That, more than anything, indicated how completely I'd moved forward. When I returned to UCLA, my decision was clear. I sat down with Alicia in our apartment, spreading my notes from both campus visits across the coffee table. Yale, I said simply, for the right reasons. Dr. Levinson's research aligns perfectly with my interests. Their new spectrography equipment is exactly what I need for my stellar evolution work, and I reached for her hand. You'll be there too. She squeezed my fingers, her expression soft. Are you sure? Berkeley is an amazing program. I don't want you to choose Yale just because of me or because of some unresolved need to claim what was once denied to you. I'm sure, I said with conviction. This isn't about the past. It's not even primarily about us, though being together is definitely a factor. It's about the research I want to do and the best environment to do it in. Yale is that environment. She studied my face, looking for any hint of doubt or conflict. Finding none, she smiled. Yale it is, then, for both of us. The decision made, we sent our acceptance emails that evening, a synchronic act that felt significant, a joint step into our future together. Then we called our parents to share the news, fielding their excited questions and congratulations with matching grins. My dad was particularly thoughtful when I spoke with him privately. Yale, he said, a note of wonder in his voice. After everything, it's Yale after all. Different context, I reminded him. Graduate program, not undergraduate. Different department, different purpose. Still, he mused, there's something poetic about it. Like the universe course correcting. I thought about that phrase, the universe course correcting. It suggested a natural order, a rightness that transcended individual actions or intentions. Was that what had happened? Had the universe somehow balanced the scales, bringing me to Yale despite Jake's sabotage, despite my revenge, despite my own decision to decline their undergraduate offer when it was belatedly extended? Or was this simply the result of hard work, determination, and the guidance of mentors like Professor Hawkins? The culmination of choices I'd made and paths I'd followed since that initial rejection? Perhaps both were true. Perhaps the universe's course corrections happened through our own choices, our own growth, our own willingness to move beyond past injuries toward future possibilities. The remainder of senior year passed quickly. Thesis completion, final exams, graduation preparations. Through it all, there was an undercurrent of anticipation about the Yale chapter ahead. Not anxious anticipation, as it might once have been, but a calm, grounded expectation of good things to come. My thesis defense went exceptionally well, earning distinction from the department. Professor Hawkins, beaming with pride, hosted a small celebration afterward for his research students. As we raised glasses of champagne in the faculty lounge, he offered a toast. To Michael Chen, he said, whose work on stellar evolution patterns has already advanced our understanding of the cosmos. Yale is fortunate to gain such a promising young researcher. There were cheers and congratulations from the group. When the party began to wind down, Professor Hawkins pulled me aside. "I have something for you," he said, handing me a small package wrapped in blue paper. A graduation gift, but also a reminder. Inside was a beautiful brass compass, antique but perfectly maintained. "For navigating new territory," he explained, "both celestial and personal." I turned it over in my hands, admiring the craftsmanship. "Thank you. It's perfect. I'm proud of you, Michael," he said seriously. "Not just for your academic achievements, which are considerable, but for your personal growth these past few years. You've navigated some difficult waters with integrity and wisdom beyond your years." His words echoed my father's when he'd given me the pocket watch, reinforcing the sense that I had indeed traveled a significant distance from the angry, vengeful person I'd been after Jake's betrayal. "I've had excellent guides," I replied sincerely. He smiled at that. "Guides can only point the way. The journey itself is always solitary." Graduation day arrived warm and clear, the UCLA campus resplendent in blue and gold decorations. My parents and sister flew in for the ceremony, bursting with pride as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. Alicia's family was there too, the two sets of parents having bonded over dinner the previous evening, already discussing visits to New Haven once we were settled. After the ceremony, amid the chaos of photographs and congratulations, I spotted Professor Hawkins at the edge of the crowd. He caught my eye and gave me a small nod of acknowledgement. Teacher to student, mentor to mentee, one astronomer to another, the simple gesture conveying volumes about our shared journey. That evening, as family celebrations wound down and Alicia and I found ourselves finally alone in our apartment, I felt a profound sense of completion. UCLA had been the setting for so much growth, so much healing, so much discovery, both scientific and personal. It had transformed me from a betrayed high school senior obsessed with revenge into a confident young researcher ready to contribute to his field. "Penny, for your thoughts," Alicia said, curling against my side on the couch. "Just reflecting," I said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "On everything that's happened since I first came to UCLA, how different I am now than I was then." Different how? I considered this carefully. When I arrived here, I was defined by what I'd lost. Yale, my best friend, my sense of security in how the world worked. I was angry, hurt, focused on evening the score. She nodded, having heard the full story months ago. "And now I'm defined by what I found. My research path, my relationship with you, my understanding of who I want to be in the world. I'm focused on building something meaningful, not settling old scores." "That's quite a journey," she observed. "It is," I agreed. "And the strangest part is that it's led right back to Yale, the place this whole story began. But I'm going there as someone entirely different now." "Sure. Full circle," she murmured. "But not really, because a circle implies ending up in the same place. This is more like a spiral, moving upward while covering similar ground." I like that image. The spiral rather than the circle, the sense of progression even as certain themes recurred. It captured something essential about the nature of growth, about how we revisit aspects of our past from new heights of understanding. In the days that followed graduation, Alicia and I packed up our apartment and prepared for the cross-country move to New Haven. It was bittersweet, saying goodbye to the place that had been our first home together, to the campus that had shaped us both academically and personally. But there was excitement too, about the new chapter ahead, the research opportunities at Yale, the life we would build together on the East Coast. The night before we left Los Angeles, I went to the UCLA Observatory one last time. Professor Hawkins had given me a key long ago, trusting me with after-hours access to the facility. I didn't use the telescope that night, just sat in the quiet darkness of the dome, listening to the faint mechanical hum of the tracking motors, breathing in the familiar sense of metal and electronics and old books. This place had been my sanctuary during some of my darkest moments. When thoughts of Jake's betrayal threatened to consume me, when the temptation to escalate my revenge plot arose, when I struggled with whether to accept Yale's belated undergraduate offer. The vast perspective of the cosmos had repeatedly grounded me, reminding me that human concerns, while significant to us, existed within a much larger context. As I sat there in the peaceful darkness, I thought about the email exchange with Jake last year. His apology, my acknowledgement, The quiet closing of that chapter without dramatic reconciliation or continued communication. It had been enough. We had both moved on to build lives that suited us better than our original plans. Jake was still at Arizona State as far as I knew, studying engineering, no longer defined by his relationship to me or his brief time at Yale. And I was headed to Yale not as the triumphant undergraduate I'd once imagined, but as a graduate researcher with specific academic goals and a clearer sense of who I was beyond any institutional affiliation. There was a symmetry to it, a balance restored not through conscious effort, but through the natural evolution of our separate paths. Perhaps that was what my dad had meant by the universe course correcting. Not some mystical realignment, but the natural tendency of human lives to find their proper shape over time, to grow toward authenticity despite detours and disruptions. I left the observatory with a sense of peaceful closure, ready to embrace the Yale chapter ahead. Not because it represented some delayed victory or cosmic justice, but because it was simply the next logical step on my path. A path that had been altered by betrayal and revenge, but not ultimately defined by them. The next morning, Alicia and I loaded the last of our belongings into the car and began the drive east. Crossing from California into Arizona, I thought briefly about Jake somewhere in Phoenix or Tempe, pursuing his own dreams, perhaps finally finding the confidence and purpose that had eluded him in Millfield. I wished him well, silently, sincerely. As the landscape changed around us, desert giving way to mountains, then plains, then the lush greenery of the eastern seaboard, I felt my perspective shifting too. This was no longer a story about betrayal and revenge. It was a story about growth, resilience, and the unexpected paths that lead us to where we're meant to be. By the time we reached New Haven, Yale was no longer the symbol it had once been, neither the dream school cruelly snatched away, nor the site of my calculated revenge. It was simply the next setting for my work, for my relationship with Alicia, for the life we were building together. And as we drove through campus for the first time as incoming graduate students, I felt not the bitter triumph I might once have imagined, nor the painful reminder of past injuries, but something much simpler and more profound. The quiet satisfaction of having arrived exactly where I was supposed to be, exactly when I was supposed to be there, and, most importantly, as exactly who I was supposed to be. The revenge story had ended long ago. This was something else entirely, a beginning, not an ending, a commencement in the truest sense of the word, and I was ready for whatever came next.